So last week's Gospel and this week talk about John the Baptist. The first week sets up his ministry, that was last week's, and this week tells us a really important moment in his ministry when he's got some doubts. Today's Gospel really gets set up last week. You might remember that I told you the story of Father Brian last week. So for those of you who weren't here, it was that we were seminarians and we were just teasing Brian a little bit, which we never do now. But back then we teased him just a little bit, and we must have pushed just that little bit hard because Brian got a little bit upset. He got really worked up and he just went, oh, you. And instead of saying brood of vipers, which is what John the Baptist calls the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he said, oh, you bride of vipers. So that line isn't that funny a line when John says it, but I still can't think of it without thinking of Brian. He's forgiven me and I've repented and all those sorts of things. John wasn't afraid to tell the truth. He wasn't afraid to say uncomfortable things. And so comments like that to the Pharisees and the Sadducees get him in lots of trouble, and he gets in more trouble too when he challenges Herod about the decisions he's made, some of the moral choices that he's made as well. And so John ends up in prison for his speaking of the truth. And it's while he's in prison, and we hear this today, that he must have had some concerns and some worries. The Gospel tonight starts off by, we hear him ask, we hear him send some of his followers to Jesus to say, are you the one that we're waiting for? Are you the one that we're waiting for, or have we got to wait for somebody else? What you can hear in that is John in prison thinking, have I backed the wrong horse here? I thought it was my cousin who was going to be the Messiah. The one that you've been waiting for was really a reference to the king that was supposed to come. Herod's not a true king of Israel. Very few people, apart from the Sadducees, think he's the real king of Israel. There's a great expectation that a king will come anointed by God. That's what the word Messiah means, somebody anointed by God. And he will come and he will free the people of Israel from not just Herod, but also from the Roman oppression, of which Herod's just a puppet figure, really. But John's ended up in prison, and it doesn't sound like he banked on that. Or perhaps he knew that he could get in trouble, but he also thought that Jesus would get him out of it. And so he sends word via his disciples, are you the one that we've been waiting for, or are we looking for a different guy? There's something like that can happen to us, I think. That when it comes to our faith, we can find ourselves, when difficult times come, when we're, as it were, in prison of one sort or another, where we find ourselves asking the question, is it really worth banking on Jesus? If I want to try and follow him, but look at the situation I'm in prison in some way. It may not be a physical prison like John's, but it might be that I'm imprisoned by some kind of suffering or trial. I might be feeling incredibly lonely. It might be that things just have not gone the way that they were supposed to go. And I've got this sense of, well, Jesus, you're supposed to fix this. Jesus, why haven't you solved or sorted this out in the way that I was expecting? We can very much sound like John the Baptist going, are you really the one that I've been waiting for? Are you worthy of my trust? Will you actually help in this situation? And it's in that moment, perhaps, that we're invited to discover something of what John the Baptist discovers, and that is that the Lord very rarely seems to show up in the time frame that we expect. Not sure if he's ever kind of shown up in my experience when I was hoping he would. And very rarely does he come in a way that we expect or in the manner that we were looking for him. It's almost always, it seems to me, that God comes as a surprise. That God shows up when we're least expecting. Now, when the disciples of John go to Jesus and they say, are you the one? You can imagine that Jesus could have just simply said yes, but that wouldn't have been very helpful. And so he seems to give this cryptic kind of answer. He says, go back and tell John what you hear and see. The blind see again, the deaf hear again, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. That could sound a little bit cryptic, like why couldn't he have just said yes? But of course, if the disciples had gone back to John the Baptist and said, Jesus said yes, you can imagine John the Baptist going, well, he says it, but what if he's deluded or not telling the truth or he's mistaken? And so Jesus' seemingly cryptic response here is actually really important, because what he's referring to are the prophecies of the Messiah from the Old Testament. Those passages in what we call the Old Testament that were pointing to the Messiah and the characteristics of the Messiah. The true King of Israel would restore things to rights. He would bring liberty to captives. He would bring sight to the blind. He would help the deaf to hear, and so forth. What Jesus is saying here is, you can see what I'm doing. I'm proving I am who I am by my actions, by what you see around you. And then there's a little line at the end where he says, and this has to be in some way a little message to John, happy is the man who doesn't lose faith in me. I think in our time, well, let me start again. Happy the man who doesn't lose faith in me. Happy the person who doesn't lose faith in me. That could sound like a rebuke. It could sound like Jesus is having a go at John for his doubts. But it could also be an encouragement, right? Happy the person who doesn't lose faith in me. Happy the person who, in the midst of trials and suffering, even imprisonment of one sort or another, keeps faith with me. In our time, where lots of people don't believe in God, it's all too easy sometimes, I think, to think about faith as being a little bit binary. You either have it or you don't. If you're a regular churchgoer, you've got faith. If somebody never darkens the door of the church, they don't have faith. But of course, faith's more complex than that. There are people who don't come to church who have some level of faith. And for us who do come to church, there are no doubt times when we experience doubts like John. Are you really the one, Jesus? Can you really help me in this situation? Can you break me out of this prison? Can you do something to rescue me? And so in this Mass tonight, I think it'd be really important that we do pray for a deeper faith. We can grow in our faith and to ask the Lord for a deeper faith. Jesus does, interestingly, he does not break John out of prison. John will ultimately die for his witness to Jesus and for his standing up for the truth. Sometimes the external experiences don't shift. But we know from this moment too that John was able to stand in his faith and was able to give his life because of what he'd received interiorly. He was not busted out of a physical prison, but the fears that he'd had that he was backing the wrong horse, they shifted. They were gone by Jesus, the power of Jesus' words, because he'd seen evidence of what Jesus was doing in the world. For us, we might not be in a physical prison, but the Lord would want to free us from the imprisonments that we experience, the kinds of moments where we feel like we're a captive to our fears, to the pain or trials or suffering that we're going through. Jesus doesn't necessarily wave a magic wand to make those go away, but he promises to fill those moments with his presence, to fill those moments with his love, to be with us in those trials. The fact that he doesn't show up in the time frame that we expect or in the manner that we often expect him to does not mean that he does not come. Our God is a faithful God. Our God is a faithful God. And he'll be faithful to us because that's his promise to us. As we celebrate the Eucharist then together this evening, let's ask for that grace of a deeper faith, that we might place our trust in the one who does want to care for us, to look after us, not to magically wave a wand to make everything better, but who promises to accompany us through every moment of life, every trial, every experience of pain or suffering, imprisonments, physical and metaphorical. Let's pray for that increase in faith in our Mass this evening.